Star Trek Academy Collision Course Chapter 41. Kirk could understand being shunned by his fellow members of Gold Team. They all had stars in their eyes, convinced they were part of some elite club of right-thinking do-gooders, none of them capable of accepting reality, that Starfleet was just another imperfect organization, imperfectly run by imperfect humans. History was littered with similar attempts at well-meaning grandeur, all of them praised at the beginning, then sent to the scrap heap in disgrace. But what Kirk didn't understand was his being shunned by his four fellow prisoners. They were all of them, him included, in the same position. Each of them, STC recruits in the STC brig, wearing the same garish Starfleet prisoner jumpsuit. As they'd set out for their morning work detail, he'd expected a certain level of camaraderie. After all, they were all bad boys who had fought back against the bureaucracy. But apparently, that's not how the other four looked at it. For some reason unknown to him, the other four were accepting of their incarceration and their punishment. Yet Kirk couldn't figure out why they were even being punished. Paisley, a communications specialist from West Virginia, had committed the unspeakable offense of returning late from Liberty, though he had missed no duty time. The soft-spoken Hamilton, within a month of shipping out as a security non-com on the Enterprise, had been caught liberating the flag of the visiting UESPA hockey team after the Starfleet hockey team he coached had beaten the visitors 18-2. Horn, a communications engineer, had apparently fallen behind his fellow conspirators during the commission of a prank, and was the only recruit found in the Commandant's office with a dozen squawking black chickens from the Colonial Agricultural Support Hall. Okay. And Rollins, covered with intricate Maori tattoos, had supposedly broken the chain of command by complaining about a lack of safety equipment in the engine lab to someone other than his direct superior, despite the fact that the safety equipment had been deficient. Kirk had been stunned to hear how trivial the offenses had been, all of them resulting in 1 or 2 weekends of lost liberty and hard labor. And yet, none of those hardened criminals, the most hardened Starfleet could come up with, it seemed, wanted anything to do with Kirk. When the others found out that he was a recruit caught tampering with the dilithium vault, they all kept their distance. For his part, Kirk couldn't understand how people so dedicated to the system could ever survive at the cutting edge of exploration. Starfleet, as always, remained a mystery to him, and one he saw no way to solve. By 0200 hours, Kirk's team had dredged away enough backed-up waste that a team of engineers could deploy a robotic probe to check the rest of the waste pipe leading to the main sewer system. For their efforts, the crew boss awarded them a 15-minute rest break before they'd have to move on to the next trouble spot on a lower level. His crewmates made quick work of their ration packs and water pouches, but Kirk did not. The smell of the place made the thought of food and drink impossible, but not the thought of escape. So while the other prisoners sat together and laughed and planned their next weekend liberty, Kirk sat to one side on a raised conduit pipe, tossing flecks of fallen insulation into the few pools of dark-standing water that remained. Fortunately, he knew, he would not be burdened by the necessity of having to take the other prisoners with him. All he had to do was choose a time when the crew boss had left the work area, then He looked up as a swath of light fell over him from the opening door of a utility closet in the stained plasticrete block wall. A silhouette stood in the doorway, someone in the gray uniform of an academy plebe, a very scrawny plebe with big ears, kind of like a Muppet. Kirk eased off the conduit. As his boots hit ground, they splashed in a small puddle, but the other prisoners didn't look over or show they heard. The less they had to do with him, the better. The silhouette held his finger to his lips, motioned Kirk forward. Kirk called out that he had to use the head. His work crew kept talking, still not acknowledging him, so Kirk stepped through the door that Spock had opened. I see, okay. And the door clicked shut behind him. A few moments later, if Kirk's 4 fellow workmates had been looking, they'd have seen the thin band of flickering golden light that momentarily shone out from beneath the door, played over the wet surfaces, then faded from sight. It was almost an hour before anyone realized Kirk was gone. "Where are we?" Kirk asked. He was on a transporter pad somewhere, he knew. That much was obvious. But it wasn't at all like the one he glimpsed when Mallory had beamed him from the Sloan complex to the plaza outside Starfleet headquarters. The Vulcan diplomatic compound. Spock jumped down from the raised platform, large enough to transport 10 people at a time, Kirk counted, and ran over to a control console. They just let anyone use this thing? There's an elusive radiation leak that is defying the technician's ability to detect. Spock was at the console, rapidly swapping data cards in and out of the input slots. "You will find your uniform and transporter pass over there." He nodded to a neatly folded pile of clothing on the floor by some kind of engineering display board covered with Vulcan script and flashing lights. "Leave your boots and coveralls on the pad." Kirk kicked off his ruined work clothes. "No sonic shower?" "I have set the transporter to exclude those aromatics." Kirk sniffed the air as he climbed into his new uniform. Spock was right. He couldn't smell any of the sludge. "Nice trick." "There is no trick. Vulcan transporter systems contain a database of the molecular frequencies of offensive odors." Kirk tugged on his new boots. "Really? Then I'm surprised humans can use them." Vulcan transporter circuits did require considerable modification after first Spock stopped and looked up, as if he had been caught revealing top-secret Vulcan intelligence. "Are you ready?" he asked Kirk. "Always. For what?" Spock left the console, ran over to Kirk with 2 ID wafers. "These are Academy Liberty passes. They will gain us access to space dock." Kirk looked at Spock with surprise. "You have been busy." A pounding noise suddenly came from a pair of sliding doors that remained closed. "Unfortunately," Spock said, "I have also been forced to work quickly, with little time to cover my tracks, I believe the colloquialism goes." Now voices, calm but loud, called out from behind the doors. Kirk guessed they were speaking a Vulcan dialect. He didn't understand a word. "What are they saying?" Spock handed Kirk one of the IDs, then ran back to the transporter platform. "They're attempting to offer support to the technicians they believe are trapped in here, being subjected to deadly radiation." Kirk took his position on the transporter lens Spock indicated. Beside him, he noticed that Spock had donned an environmental modulator headband that covered his eyes with dark amber lenses and his ears with acoustic baffles. Kirk was aware they were the type of device worn by colonists who had acclimated to, or had been genetically modified for, worlds with thin atmospheres. Since a few Academy mids might reasonably wear them, they were a good choice to cover up Spock's more prominent Vulcan features without looking like a disguise. "Should we say something to the guys at the door?" Kirk asked. "That would only encourage their efforts to enter. According to the readings they're picking up, any Vulcan in here at this time would already be beyond saving." A series of electronic tones came from the unattended control console. "Is that right?" Kirk asked. "Are you beyond saving?" "I believe that is likely," Spock answered, "but it shall be an interesting hypothesis to put to the test." "I like your style, Stretch." Spock flipped up his modulator lenses to see Kirk more clearly. "Indeed," was all he said. "Indeed," Kirk replied with a smile. Spock tapped his headband, and the lenses snapped down, and then the transporter took them. Alyssa Corso stared at her empty closet, unwilling to close it yet. Reflexively, she untangled 2 hangers, so even in its emptiness, the closet would reflect Starfleet standards of order. Only then did she close the door and turn for one last look at her dorm room. Z's pads and study guides and computer screen were neatly arranged on her desk. Alyssa's desk was empty. Her mattress was rolled up, linens folded neatly. Beside them, a laundry services bag and a Starfleet duffel contained her uniforms, exercise clothes, class supplies, anything and everything that would ever remind her of this place where her childhood dream had come true and then had been crushed. Her personal communicator chirped. The identifier display told her who it was. Why not? Alyssa thought. At least she was leaving Archer Hall with one good friend. She flipped the communicator open. Hi, Z. You still there? Just leaving. Are you around? No, Look, I'm so sorry, but I've got an engineering seminar to help out with. I won't be able to get back for a couple hours at least. Alyssa didn't question Z, didn't ask for details. She understood completely. She was being separated for an honors violation. No sane mid would dare to have anything to do with her. It's okay, I gotta go. But it's so fast, Corso. I mean, they gave you a couple of days to prepare last time. They were going to hold an honor board. You had a chance to fight back. Alyssa didn't want to revisit the events of the last 24 hours. There was nothing more to think or feel. She was dead inside. They gave me a deal, she said flatly. I signed a confession and agreed to accept separation for an honors violation, and Starfleet agreed not to come after me with criminal charges. As long as I go now and go fast, that's the end of it. Criminal? Z sounded truly surprised. Your boyfriend tried to steal the dilithium, not you. Jim used my codes again. I was so stupid, and he knew it. He was only using me. And if I'm that easy to get to, I don't belong here. It's as simple as that. I wish you could fight it. I wish there... What? I wish I was there, and I wish you could go to the Commandant and tell him who really deserves to pay for this, and it isn't you. No, it's over. I'll go back to Risa. You go be an admiral or something. I'll come visit you on break. Alyssa knew Z wouldn't, but appreciated the lie. I'll see you then. Hot jets, huh? Z didn't laugh at the old spaceman's greeting. You too. Happy landings. Then the circuit clicked off. Alyssa was finally alone with all that she'd lost. She hadn't told Z, but she agreed with her on something. Jim Kirk deserved to pay for what he'd done to her. Z snapped her communicator shut and cheered. It worked! She hugged Griffin. Pleased that Dalla was down on the cargo deck with the boys. You're brilliant! Griffin gave her a playful tap on her backside, then pushed her away. Not the response she'd wanted. She's really gone? They had her sign a confession in the end. Griffin sat back in his chair. His voice echoed in his office. There was little left in it but the old furniture. All the crates, carpets, and other accumulated goods of the past year were packed and gone. Transported up to the orbiting random wave, the sleek little private transport he'd hired. Not much in the way of passenger amenities, though he wouldn't need it for long, and it had a remarkably large payload bay with a recently upgraded cargo transporter certified for biological organisms. So that's it? Z asked. It's over? She was in her academy uniform. The long cloak she'd used to cover it was folded on the old couch. She tugged down her gray shirt and sat on the edge of his desk, putting herself in easy reach if he'd ever come to his senses. Almost, but for you it is. She reached out, put a hand on his chest. Then I can come with you. He sat unmoving until she removed her hand. You know that's not going to happen. Z stared at him, feeling somehow abused. I've done everything you've told me. That was the deal. He reached up and took her chin in his hand. His grip was almost painful. Z couldn't twist away. The deal isn't over, little Admiral. You're home free on this one. You got us the dilithium. You got your idiot roommate to take the blame. You're perfectly in place. 3 years from now, you'll graduate, be assigned to Starfleet Command with a spotless record. Do you have any idea how valuable that makes you to the General? That wasn't our deal. Griffin tightened his grip on her chin. Z felt tears of pain sting her eyes. Your only other option is to be dead, and that includes your family. You want to think that one over? He released her, and she almost lost her balance. Z knew she had to respond and do so quickly. Her options had run out, and she'd placed herself in the general's power. But Griffin could act. The general listened to him. All she had to do was give him incentive. All I'm saying is I want to go with you, Griff. I want to be with you, doing the general's work on the frontier. For once, Griffin looked at her as if she meant something to him. You don't want to be out there. This is a good assignment. No one's shooting at you. You've got a really good chance of not dying tomorrow. What about you? The intensity of his gaze weakened Z. She didn't care what the dangers were. She had to follow him. This went well. So when I get to base, I know the first thing the general's going to do is send me out to do it again. And when I come back here, I'm going to need you again. I need you now, she said, risking his ridicule, but incapable of hiding her feelings any longer. Griffin stood and put his arms around her. I know, he said into her hair. When I come back, no Dala. We'll be a team. He stepped away, and Z felt fluttery. How long? She asked. 4 months, Griffin said. 6 at the most. You should be on the commandant's list by then. Deal, she said, already counting the days. But if she wasn't leaving with him now, then she knew that to keep herself valuable, she'd have to leave the Pacific Rim soon to go to her seminar and continue the mind-numbing monotony of being a mid. Griffin smiled. I've just got one more thing to do before I go. He tapped a control on his communicator. Z heard running footsteps on the metal stairs outside the office, leading up from the cargo deck. A moment later, Matthew rushed in, sweating, stained with dirt and packing grease from the work he was overseeing below. Yes, sir, he said. One last loose end to tie up. Family member. Griffin looked at Z and winked. A trickle of fear ran through her suddenly, then just as quickly vanished as she knew whose time had come. The Kirk brothers. She'd kill them herself if Griffin asked her. Chapter 42. Kirk decided he was getting used to this transporter business. He felt a slight lurch in his stomach as the system compensated for the change from Earth's natural gravity to the artificial field he materialized in, and then it was as if nothing had happened at all. You do this a lot? He asked Spock, but the Vulcan was already on his way out of the transporter alcove. An amplified voice said, Please clear the platform for incoming traffic. Kirk leaped down after Spock and abruptly found himself in a stream of pedestrians, all moving to the right. He spotted Spock's headgear through the shifting landscape of shoulders. Civilian, uniformed, and even a few alien, and sprinted after him. To his right, he passed transporter alcove after alcove, and travelers who were in the process of disappearing or reappearing. The overlapping musical notes of the multiple beam-ins and beam-outs was magical, the constant ebb and flow of transporter light, the background hum of 100 conversations, some in languages Kirk had never heard, all blended with non-stop announcements of arrivals and departures. He felt his heart race, his breath quicken, and his rapid breathing delivered sense to him he'd never experienced before. The sweat of humans who ate food grown in other ecosystems, the sweat of aliens whose chemistry had evolved on worlds 1,000 light years from Earth. Kirk's pace slowed. He felt himself bump to one side, then another. It was as if he'd been swept up in rapids of memory, and he had no desire to swim to clear waters. And then he felt a strong hand grip his arm and pull him to the side, out of the way of all the others who knew where they were going. Are you quite all right? Spock asked. He looked concerned. Kirk nodded, out of breath. It's just, I had forgotten, that's all. Forgotten what? Spock asked. The old United Earth Transportation Hub was a smaller orbiting platform primarily for commercial traffic, but to 13-year-old Jimmy Kirk, It was a stepping stone to the realm that filled his dreams and his heart. They had arrived by shuttle, father and son, and Jimmy had clutched his duffel all the way from Earth into orbit, and then again as he and his father had been cleared through customs, medical, and immigration. It was his father's duffel, scuffed and mended with a faded Starfleet chevron and the names of 3 ships, 3 wondrous names that Jimmy still whispered each night before he slept: USS Atlantis, USS Ames, USS Constitution. They were the incantations of his childhood, and they worked, because here he was, looking through a viewport at a starship, not as grand as the ones whose names he'd learned so long ago, before he could recite the alphabet, but his starship, the one he would ride past all the planets and 1,000 other stars, just like his father. "There she is, son," his father said, and Jimmy gazed out at the craft, little more than a blunt cylinder with twin nacelles, the Mariner Princess. "She's a good ship," his father said, and put his arm around in one last hug before the long absence and the missed birthday. "Tarsus is going to be quite an adventure for you. A lot of fun, a lot of hard work. And if I know you, the second you get back, you won't be able to wait to go out there again." Jimmy hung on every word, because what 13-year-old expects his father to lie to him? "Nothing," Kirk told Spock. "I thought we were going to beam straight to the Enterprise." Spock didn't seem convinced, but pointed to a large main exit. "We must proceed to the Starfleet levels first." "Always a catch," Kirk said, but he didn't hesitate. Sam Kirk had run out of time and money. His brother was unreachable. His father's last message had come from Iowa, which meant he'd return to the farm. That left him on his own again, alone in the city with only Griffin's gang for company. Sam knew they would come for him. He knew Griffin ruled his particular slice of Earth's fading, almost non-existent underworld by fear. If a weak underling defied him by not doing as he was told and got away with that, others would start ignoring him as well. "I'll become his example." Sam didn't doubt for a moment that that was the fate Griffin had planned for him. His mind filled with a gruesome image. His body would be found... Woo! Yeah, not good. Somewhere where the type of people who had dealings with Griffin and his kind would be the first to see it. The protectors wouldn't find his body for days. By then, the word would have spread and Griffin's lesson would have been communicated. Defy Griffin, and this is what you can expect. But for all the time that Sam had worked for the gang leader, endured by his insults and his threats, knowing that those who failed to do as ordered met foul ends, he'd never actually planned a personal escape. His little brother would have, Sam knew. Of course, Jimmy never would have become involved with anyone like Griffin, but show that kid a potentially dangerous situation, and his mind went to work on it, coming up with at least 5 different ways to backtrack or get out or simply avoid it. He was always figuring out the rules, Jimmy was, because when he knew all the rules, he'd say, then you'd know how to break them the right way. Sam could only break the rules the wrong way. And the rule he was breaking now was, don't return to a known location. He knew he was taking a terrible risk, but what else could he do? Hidden in his apartment was the 1,000-credit wafer Griffin had given him, the down payment for delivering Jimmy to the Pacific Rim. Sam had been afraid to carry it around with him. What if Griffin asked for it back, and he'd lost it when he blacked out in one of the establishments he liked to visit where the doors had no signs? But now Sam needed that money himself. He'd worked out a half-formed plan to travel to New Zealand to the Starfleet penal colony. He was guessing Jimmy might turn up there. He pictured the look on Jimmy's face when he saw that his first visitor at the colony was him. It would be great. They'd be able to make plans again. They'd both get another chance. Sam clung to the reassuring thought. It gave him something to look forward to. And then Sam reached the top of the emergency stairwell of his apartment building. He took a moment to steady his nerves, preparing to do one of the most dangerous things he'd ever done: enter his own apartment. The first thing Sam noticed was a smell. There really wasn't one. Not a bad one, at least. Instead, his apartment smelled the way home had years ago. Dad, he thought. The old man was obsessive when it came to keeping things shipshape. Sam knew enough not to turn on any lights, not until he'd checked things out. So he waited inside the shuttered apartment, letting his eyes adjust to aquarium light and the faint glow of daylight coming through the slatted metal blinds. Gradually, he began to see the signs of his father's handiwork. Everything had been cleaned up and straightened out. At least he knew his fish had been cared for when he'd been hiding out. Joe Kirk would have seen to that. That thought brought another swiftly to his mind. Sam stopped, uncertain. Sorry he'd used the block inhaler before starting up the stairs. The block made life easier, but it kept him from thinking straight. Who would look after his fish for him now? He couldn't leave them. Jimmy would be in some place like New Zealand. Maybe, Sam thought, I should call Dad again. Better yet, Mom. She could talk Dad into coming back for my aquarium. They could probably arrange the money for a transporter trip, at least on the way back. That'd be easier on my fish. Sam felt better. He'd figured out a plan himself. He'd get the sea wafer, pack a bag, then, when he was back on the street and out of danger, he'd call home, tell his parents about the fish. Everything would work out fine. He patted his jacket, felt the inhaler there. Maybe he should use it again, now that the problem with the fish was settled. That'd make packing easier. He pulled it out of his pocket. That's when the hallway door behind him smashed open and he was thrown to the side. Before he could get up by himself, he was dragged to his feet. 2 kids he'd never seen before, but they smelled like packing grease in the bay, so he could guess where they'd come from. One of them slapped his hand against a wall control, and the apartment filled with light as a third person entered. Matthew stopped in front of him. No laser rifle. He had the alien weapon, and he was pointing it at him. Georgie. Sam gave up then, as if a switch had been thrown or a circuit cut. "Aw, just kill me now," he said. "Aw, you're not going to snivel. Beg? Try to cut a deal?" Sam shook his head. Without his brother or his dad, he had no way out of this, so why even bother? "Where's the fun in that, Georgie? Griffin told me we could have fun with you." I messed up, okay?" Sam said tonelessly. He was so tired. He felt the inhaler still in his hand, even though his hands were being held tight behind his back. He wondered if Matthew would let him use it one more time before they started to do whatever it was they were going to do to him. "I always mess up." Matthew seemed disappointed. "You trying to become an honest man or something?" "No, I'm nothing." Matthew looked at his 2 soldiers. "Well, this is going to be a dull afternoon." He made an adjustment on the alien weapon. "Let's liven things up." He fired at the wall beside the kitchen alcove, scorched a framed poster for an exhibition of Tellarite mud sketches at the Exploratorium. The poster was 10 years old. It had been there when Sam moved in. Matthew frowned at Sam's lack of reaction. He fired into the couch, and a cushion exploded as the foam inside the fabric was released. Then he aimed at the aquarium. "Not the fish," Sam said. His pulse fluttered. "Come on." Matthew brightened. "So you do care about something." Sam tried to pull free from the kids, but failed. "Matthew, you got me. That's all Griffin wants. Leave him alone." "Gotta make you hurt somehow, Georgie. Griffin's orders." He fired the weapon, and a lance of energy shattered the tank, spraying sparks where the mechanics of the pump and the light were disrupted. A cloud of steam hissed, and superheated water erupted from the jagged hole. Quick flashes of shivering orange and white cascaded to the floor. Sam Kirk lost the capacity of rational thought. Using strength his captors had not suspected, Sam wrenched his arms free and with an inarticulate cry of rage, brought his elbow up to smash the nose of one kid and spun to lodge his fist in the gut of the other. Matthew just had time to lose his sneer as Sam lunged on him, using one arm to to deflect the alien weapon as it swung toward its new target, and the other hand to switch on the inhaler and spray its contents directly into Matthew's face. Sam's mindless charge took him forward, barreling Matthew over until they fell, Sam landing solidly on top of his would-be assassin, spraying even more of the block as Matthew desperately gulped for air, stunned by the unexpected impact and fall. Then Matthew's flailing arms flopped unsteadily to the floor as the block took effect. He moaned, unhurt, but incapable of coordinated movement. Sam heard movement behind him, spun around to see the two kids charge him, ready to take him down by themselves. But Sam had the alien weapon now, and he fired it, sweeping back and forth, stunning his attackers and dropping them instantly. Still not thinking anything coherent, weapon in hand, Sam rushed to the ruin of the tank. His fish lay motionless on the floor, dead, because of him, because of what he'd let his life become. He couldn't leave them there like that, so he emptied out a cylinder of fish food and carefully laid the tiny forms inside together. He put the container back in the aquarium on the damp gravel and rearranged a few of the rocks that had been their favorite places for hide and seek. A part of Sam knew that his fish had lasted this long only because Jimmy or Joe Kirk had taken care of them, just as they tried to take care of him. But he wasn't a kid anymore, and his family couldn't take care of his whole life. Grieving, Sam lifted his inhaler in his hand, shook it. He heard the liquid slosh inside, enough block for another dose or two, enough to ease his pain, for now. He knew Jimmy wouldn't use the block. Jimmy would already be making plans to be sure that nothing bad like this ever happened again. It was a hard decision, and it surprised Sam that he could reach it without assistance. He put the inhaler in the damp gravel beside the container and said goodbye to both. A few minutes later, he had stuffed his bag with clothes, put the 1000C wafer in his pocket. The two kids were unconscious, breathing slowly. Matthew was singing some kind of song to himself, waving his fingers back and forth in front of his nose, oblivious to where he was and to the fact that Sam stood over him with a deadly alien weapon. It would be so easy, Sam knew, as easy as using the inhaler to fire the weapon at Matthew and keep firing until the stun effect stopped his heart or paralyzed his lungs. That would pay him back for a year of abuse. But then, Sam thought, I'd really be the same as him. And what would Jimmy think of me? He dropped the weapon on the floor, drove his heel into its barrel until it snapped and released a small puff of smoke. He was finished here. It was time to make a real plan. Chapter 43. Reaching the Starfleet levels of space dock was deceptively simple. Kirk and Spock merely walked up a sloping pedestrian ramp and held their IDs at shoulder level as they passed through 2 of 21 sensor stations. To Kirk, the sensor stations looked like nothing more than empty door frames. "That's it?" he asked as he saw Spock attach his ID back on the equipment belt he wore under his gray midshipman's shirt. "Yes," Spock said. He looked around, pointed to the left. "The viewing levels lead to the airlock decks." Kirk attached his own ID to his belt. All around them, walking purposefully, were uniformed men and women in a surprising variety of Starfleet uniforms and civilian clothes. Kirk saw none of the crowding and pushing of the exotic public levels of space dock, yet the sense of charged excitement here was even more intense than it had been below. "Can I ask how you managed to collect all this?" Kirk gestured so Spock would know he meant the uniforms and the passes and the IDs. Spock began walking forward quickly, moving just as decisively as everyone else on this level. "Apparently, there are times when Vulcan diplomatic staff and political appointees need to travel to various Starfleet facilities, yet, because of security issues, do not wish their visit to be part of the public record. To aid such classified visits, Starfleet provides the embassy with documents and uniforms." Kirk kept his eyes front as he matched Spock's pace. "So what you're saying is you stole these disguises?" Spock risked a glance at Kirk. broke stride. I am an employee of the embassy. Therefore, I have the full right to use its facilities. Admittedly, I might have erred when I submitted my request for those items to the office of a clerk who has since returned to Vulcan. However, I am certain that the request will be forwarded to the proper clerk by tomorrow afternoon. And they'll turn it down, right? Who can know the future? They passed through a large doorway and had just turned the corner when Kirk glanced ahead. He almost stumbled, caught himself. "Oh," he said, or thought he said. He was vaguely aware that his voice sounded hoarse, but not much else registered as he stared at what lay before him. An unending row of viewports, 3 decks high, looking into the vast technological cavern of Space Dock's largest berthing area. And just outside those viewports, the spotlit, blue-white majesty of a legend. She was almost 300 meters long, almost 75 meters tall, her saucer-shaped primary hull racing forward even at rest, exquisitely balanced by her soaring warp nacelles that rose up to either side like outspread wings to carry her through the infinities. She was beautiful. He knew her shape intimately from countless images, but never had he seen her like this, alive, in person, so close he could almost touch her. "The Enterprise," he breathed. And somewhere in the distant reaches of his memory, he heard Joe Kirk proclaiming the names of the stars in just such a voice as an old dream he had all but forgotten reawakened within him. Kirk heard Spock's voice as if from afar. "We should hurry. There is much we must do." "I know," Kirk said, and together they rushed on. The main personnel umbilical tunnel from the first airlock level of the dry dock facility joined the Enterprise at an airlock in the lower aft section of her primary hull. And whatever majesty the ship possessed as seen from her exterior, on the interior there was none, at least not in the cargo bay beyond that airlock. A red-shirted security officer stood at the open pressure door, arms folded imposingly. Kirk noticed at once that he had one of the newest tricorder models, with the sensor apparatus further miniaturized and now part of a single main unit. One good thing about Starfleet, it always gave its people the best toys. Spock came to a stop at the ridge of the docking collar pressure seal, marking the line where the umbilical tunnel ended and the starship began. "Midshipman Newman and Jones request permission to come aboard, Lieutenant," he said. The officer took Kirk's and Spock's IDs, activated them. "Here for the seminars?" he asked. Kirk didn't know what to reply. What seminars, he thought, but Spock seemed to know what to expect and said, "Yes, sir." The lieutenant clearly approved of the way Spock had responded, as snappy and crisp as any new recruit. "Which one?" Kirk saw Spock blink behind his lenses. Apparently that was a random question he wasn't expecting. Fortunately, it appeared the officer had had some experience with confused midshipmen. "Leadership or engineering?" "Engineering," Kirk and Spock said it together. Main engineering was where the dilithium was stored, so that's where they'd wait for Griffin to make his move. The officer nodded, handed back the IDs. "Midshipman Newman, Midshipman Jones, welcome aboard the USS Enterprise." He pointed past a forest of scaffolding where workers were installing conduits in the exposed overhead, 2 decks up. Welding sparks cascaded down to bounce off the polyduranium decking and stacks of tarp-covered hex crates. "The turbolift's outside the main doors over there. Look for the silver doors. Get in, tell the computer to take you to Deck 18. You'll want briefing room 7, halfway along the corridor on the left." Then Kirk took his first step aboard the Enterprise. The tunnel had had a bit of a bounce to it, as the artificial gravity field of Space Dock overlapped that of the starship, but once Kirk took that first step, the gravity that held him was solid and certain. Kirk felt his chest relax. It felt like home. The new turbolift control panel was smaller than the old one, and so was kept in place by gray tape. Handwritten notations were scrawled on the wall, indicating where new mounting holes were to be drilled. "This ship isn't even 5 years old," Kirk said wonderingly. "Starfleet policy," Spock explained. "No starship is ever completely finished. Upgrades are constant as technologies are refined." Kirk considered that statement as Spock told the computer which deck they wanted. He'd always thought of Starfleet as a hopelessly moribund organization mired in the past. It appeared their starships weren't. There was a slight sway as the lift car began moving to the side, then another as it began to drop. Kirk visualized their location based on his mental picture of the exterior. He reckoned the car had taken them directly aft through the saucer section, and that they were now traveling straight down the angled support pylon connecting the primary and secondary hulls. Somewhere in his mind's memory files, he retrieved the information that Deck 18 was one of the uppermost ones in the secondary hull. That could pose a problem. "I don't think 18's the engineering deck," he told Spock. "Correct. Main engineering is one deck down. There will be ladders." "Ladders," Kirk said, as the turbolift hummed to a stop and the doors puffed open. "Advanced technology, of course." Kirk's attention was on full alert as they stepped into the corridor. He noted that this section of the vessel, at least, looked as if the refit had been completed. The walls and traction carpet were new and unworn in an artfully blended range of monochromatic grays. The corridor felt slightly cramped to him, with its series of narrow A-frame emergency pressure seals every few meters. But considering that the ship could carry a crew of 200, he conceded that space, even in a vessel as large as this, had to be at a premium. Spock started walking to the left. "Wait," Kirk said. "We're not really going to the seminar, are we?" Spock's serious expression indicated he had no intention of wasting any additional time. "There will be an interdeck ladder at the end of this corridor. We will use it to descend to Deck 19. "How do you know so much about this ship?" "I studied the deck map." Kirk had seen a deck map posted outside the umbilical tunnel entrance, but they'd passed it in seconds. "When?" he asked. "When we passed it at the entrance to the umbilical tunnel," Spock answered. Kirk walked the rest of the way beside Spock in silence, telling himself he had to stop underestimating the Vulcan. Probably all Vulcans. The corridor took them past Briefing Room 7, where some sort of engineering seminar was being held for mids. But Kirk and Spock kept eyes front. Neither slowed down or looked in, which is why they didn't notice the seminar leader noticed them. Midshipman Z. Bailoff was on her personal communicator in seconds. Chapter 44. The curbing corridor on Deck 19 looked like a war zone. The refit here was still in progress. There was no carpet. Kirk's and Spock's boots rang on the only deck surface. Gleaming bare anti-grav plates of splotchy anodized blue-gray. The corridor's starboard bulkhead was missing for most of its length, revealing an impenetrable wall of densely packed pipes and wires that Kirk never would have suspected existed, and the corridor's uneven lighting issued from a string of plasma globes haphazardly hanging from overhead supports. A few of the globes were flickering, their charges running out. "This is no way to treat this ship," Kirk said as he stepped around anti-grav work platforms and equipment carts. "I am sure the Enterprise is not aware of how she is being treated," Spock countered. "That's not the point." Kirk straightened a work order sheet that was clipped to a cable that had been pulled out of a conduit. Then he had the jarring realization that that was something his father might have done. He made a mental note not to repeat his action. It was bad enough he had his father's haircut. The silver door to engineering was not much larger than any of the others they'd passed, so Kirk guessed there must be other ways into it. How else to install the equipment that must be inside? Then he wondered if the fact that it was closed meant that he and Spock would need some kind of additional clearance to enter. Do we just walk up to it? Kirk asked. I am aware of no special security measures in effect, Spock said. Kirk walked up to the closed door, and at the last moment it slipped open, and he stepped into the heart of the Enterprise. The first thing that struck him about the facility, other than its double-height overhead, was that it was staffed, in a manner of speaking. 2 plebes were working at a section of the long black control console that ran along the starboard side of the room. From the tense way they spoke to each other, they had a problem to solve, and weren't solving it. But as if in counterpoint to the tension between them, a second classman with a metallic shirt and longer hair that marked his year leaned against the nearby stair rail, arms folded, with a delighted grin plastered across his face. That grin widened as he saw Kirk and Spock. "Ah!" he said in a lilting Irish brogue that Kirk suspected was not how the mid usually spoke. "Fresh victims!" Kirk and Spock exchanged a look. They had expected workers to be present, not trainees. "Sean Finnegan," the smiling mid announced as he approached the newcomers. "And you would be—" Spock stood at attention, and Kirk realized he should follow suit. They were wearing third-classman uniforms, indicating that they were about to begin their second year in the academy. But Finnegan was a second-classman, beginning his third year. So according to the Academy's code of conduct, they should report to him as they would any superior officer. "Midshipman Newman," Spock said. "Midshipman Jones," Kirk said. Finnegan made a face, disappointed. "Newman and Jones, you're not scheduled for any tests here?" "Our scheduled seminar has been delayed," Spock said promptly, and Kirk was impressed with how easily he concocted that story on the fly. "So we have elected to undertake an orientation tour." "On your own? That's not quite Starfleet procedure. Which company would you be with?" Kirk took up the explanation, ignoring the question. "A ship in this kind of shape, there's a lot of confusion." Before Finnegan could repeat himself, one of the plebes at the console called to him in a voice of despair. "Mr. Finnegan, we can't rectify the input signals." The plebe was at least a head taller than Spock, and had auburn stubble and broad features. In centuries past, his soft accent could only have been labeled Russian. But Kirk heard the slightly clipped compression of his vowels. The plebe was someone who had grown up in the Martian colonies. The second plebe turned from the console. Her strong but balanced features conveyed strength more than beauty, but only slightly more. Her eyes were the same gray as her uniform, and her stark black hair had been cut stylishly like a skin-tight cap with delicately feathered bangs. It was well within regulation length, but it most certainly was not the work of a Starfleet barber. She was holding up a single-unit tricorder. "But this says we've done everything right, and the circuit is perfect." Finnegan made a show of rubbing his chin and thought, "You don't say. Then might I make a tiny suggestion?" "Please," the Martian plebe said. "In a case like this," Finnegan continued with utmost sincerity, "you'll find it's vital to double-check the interior connections of the duotronic ports." It's pathetic. The Martian and the striking young woman looked at each other as if Finnegan had just given them instructions in Klingon. The Martian spoke first. "We don't know how to do that on this equipment." "Ah," Finnegan said, as if the mystery of the universe had just been revealed to him. "What you'll need to do first is to unlatch the M4 module to the right there, then swing it open, and that's where you'll see it, sure as I'm standing here." The plebes nodded, turned back to the console. Kirk heard several clicks as contact points were released, and then both plebes jumped back with cries of startled shock as giant alien worms erupted from the console to attack them. Kirk reflexively started forward to help the plebes fight the creatures, but Spock's hand gripped his shoulder and kept him from making a fool of himself. As peals of Finnegan's laughter echoed in the engineering hold, the alien worms bounced and skittered across the deck, revealed as nothing more than springs wrapped in brightly colored cloth. The plebes were embarrassed and, Kirk could easily see, angered, but they said nothing and even attempted good-natured smiles as Finnegan extolled the virtues of always expecting the unexpected in space. Finnegan picked up one of the spring snakes a particularly lurid purple and pink monster. He admired the way it flopped around as he came back to Kirk and Spock. "Now, where were we?" he asked. "Ah, yes. You are avoiding my very simple question. Which company would you be with?" Kirk waited to hear what story Spock was going to come up with. This time, when the main door puffed open behind them. At first, Kirk was thankful for the interruption. Then he saw who had entered and realized the time for stories was over. "Jimmy," Z said from the open doorway, almost purring. "What a surprise." She looked at Spock. "Who's the alien?" "Alien, is it?" Finnegan asked. He walked around Kirk and Spock to stand near Z as she stepped forward and the door behind her closed. Kirk could see that Spock understood there was no more reason to remain in disguise. He took off his modulator headpiece. "A Vulcan?" Finnegan said in surprise. Then he smiled. "In a midshipman's uniform, when the Academy has no Vulcans at all. He turned to Z with no attempt to conceal his pleasure. "Would you happen to be knowing these two, then? Newman and Jones, they called themselves." "Meet Jimmy, Kirk, and Mr. Spock," Z said. She seemed just as pleased as Finnegan. Kirk stepped forward. "I can explain. The people who stole the dilithium from the Academy. They're going to try to steal the dilithium here." Z shook her head. "Nice try, Jimmy." "But Alyssa confessed. She's left the Academy, and last I heard she was buying a ticket back to Risa." "She left? But she didn't do anything." Kirk had an idea and acted on it swiftly. He pointed to the two confused plebes who hadn't budged from the booby-trapped console. "You two, what are your names?" "Naderi," the Martian told him. The young woman said, "Delmar." "Okay," Kirk said. "Naderi, Delmar, use your tricorders on..." He looked around the engine room, saw the accelerator chamber stretching into the distance behind its wall of safety screen. The modular power converters lined up on the port side, then found what he was looking for in the forward section. "That!" "Dilithium storage?" Naderi asked. "Check the security function. Look for a signal jamming circuit." "No," Z ordered. "Don't listen to him." Kirk saw the plebes automatically respond to the chain of command. Z wore her third-year uniform, and on that basis outranked them. Z gave Kirk a smug smile of triumph, pulled out her communicator, but Finnegan interrupted. "Close that thing for a moment, would you? There's something not right here." Z hesitated. Finnegan's Irish brogue faded a bit as he took control of the situation. "I gave you an order, midshipman. Your uniform tells me you're a third-classman." He waggled a finger at Kirk and Spock. "Just like these two impostors, it seems." Kirk could see that Z disliked being compared to him and Spock. "I'm Z Bailoff, Company 12. She held out her communicator. "You can call my administration and confirm." Finnegan took the communicator, kept it shut. "Now that that's settled, may I ask a question?" "Call administration," Z urged. Finnegan's smile disappeared completely. "I'm the ranking mid here, so I'll give the orders. Now why don't you want dilithium vault scanned? Seems suspicious to me." Z stayed silent, but her face revealed frustration. "All right, then," Finnegan said. "Mr. Naderi, Ms. Delmar, scan the vault as Mr. Kirk suggested." Kirk looked at Spock, wondering if he'd have to change his opinion of Academy midshipmen as well. This Finnegan seemed to be a reasonable guy, giant spring-loaded alien worms notwithstanding. The plebes weren't yet proficient with their tricorders, so Finnegan let Kirk help them with the settings. Both got the same results. The security system in the vault was defective. "Is there dilithium in the vault?" Kirk asked Finnegan. Finnegan looked concerned by the tricorder results. "The warp core's cold, not due for calibration till next week," he said. "So I'd say yes." He took another look at one of the tricorders, adjusted a few settings, and handed it back to Naderi. "For a moment there," Finnegan said to the group, "with all this funny business going on, I was thinking to myself that maybe a few of my friends were trying to play a small prank on me. Though why, I couldn't tell you. But now I think we've gone a little too far, and it's time to move this up the line." He opened Z's communicator. "You can't do that," Z protested. Finnegan narrowed his eyes. And why is that? Z sighed as if giving up. Because it is a prank? Not on you. She pointed to Kirk and Spock. On them. Classmates. She gave a sheepish grin. Guess I played it too seriously. An uncertain smile played over Finnegan. No, I like a good joke as much as the next minute, but... He trailed off as Spock moved to stand before him, head cocked, eyes questioning. Mr. Finnegan, Spock said, do I look like an Academy midshipman? That was when Kirk put the final piece of the puzzle in place. It was you, he said to Z. Finnegan looked at Kirk, puzzled, but he didn't stop him from talking. You're part of Griffin's gang, Kirk said to Z. You got in Melissa's codes to steal the Academy dilithium. Kirk pointed to the vault. And you're here to steal that dilithium too. How? He demanded. What's the plan? Z stared at him like someone trapped before a stampede. But before she could defend herself or confess or simply argue that he was mistaken, a blaring alarm rang out, reverberating in the oversized engineering compartment. What's that? Naderi asked. It is the alarm code for an escape pod drill, Spock said loudly. Finnegan frowned. But her in space dock! And then the ship's computer voice joined the alarm. And to Kirk, everything became clear. This is an emergency evacuation order, the measured mechanistic voice calmly intoned. All personnel must abandon ship at once. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Kirk knew exactly how Z planned to steal the dilithium. He just didn't know how to stop her. Yet.